I smiled through gritted teeth and acted like the perfect sibling, pretending to support my brother's wedding to the manipulative gold digger he was blindly in love with. But when the moment was right there at the altar, I exposed everything with undeniable proof and watched her mask crumble. My brother Jake was always the favored one, a top athlete, an excellent student, and the first to earn a college degree. When he introduced Meredith to our family during the holidays, our parents practically began wedding preparations before the main course was even served. She's ideal for him, my mother cooed, watching Meredith chuckle at my father's terrible jokes. Finally, someone who recognizes what a catch he is. I wanted to believe it. Jake deserved happiness after his chaotic separation from Sarah, who had emptied their shared accounts and vanished with her yoga instructor. He'd spent 2 years reconstructing his life, working grueling hours and completely avoiding romantic entanglements. The betrayal had shattered him. I discovered him weeping in his empty apartment, surrounded by legal papers and divorce decrees, questioning where he had gone wrong. I gave her everything, he had confided that evening. I thought we were building a future together. When he eventually started dating again, we were all desperate for him to find someone authentic, someone who would see beyond his achievements to the man beneath, the man who still sent flowers to our mother on her birthday, who coached youth baseball on weekends, who had driven 14 hours nonstop when our cousin had been in a car accident. However, something felt off about Meredith from the moment she stepped into our home. She was stunning, charming, and said all the correct things, too correct, as if she had rehearsed every conversation. When Jake left the room for a drink or to use the restroom, her smile would falter for just a moment before instantly reappearing. She would scrutinize family photographs on our mantelpiece with an intensity that made my skin crawl, asking intricate questions about every face, every vacation, every significant event. "Who is this distinguished gentleman?" she would inquire, pointing to our grandfather's portrait. "He appears so successful. What kind of business was he involved in?" "Real estate development," my mother would respond proudly. "He constructed half the shopping centers in town." I observed Meredith's eyes brighten as she absorbed another piece of financial data. The warning signs began subtly, but rapidly multiplied. Meredith always had an excuse when the bill arrived at restaurants. "Oh, I forgot my wallet again," she'd exclaim. She would order the most expensive items on the menu, lobster, aged steaks, premium cocktails, then claim she wasn't very hungry halfway through. Jake would dismiss it with a laugh and cover everything, even leaving a generous tip to compensate for her barely touched meals. "She's just forgetful," he'd say when I mentioned her convenient memory lapses. "And she's been stressed with work lately. You know how demanding marketing can be." Her profession was another enigma that grew more perplexing the more I paid attention. She claimed to work in marketing for a technology startup called Digital Dynamics, but her schedule was entirely unpredictable. Sometimes she'd be in urgent client meetings at 11 p.m. on a Sunday. Other times, she'd be completely free all day on a busy Wednesday. When I inquired about her company's name or what products they marketed, she'd offer vague responses about digital solutions and streamlining business processes before quickly changing the subject. "You know how these tech companies are," she'd say with a dismissive wave. "Everything's proprietary and confidential. I've signed so many non-disclosure agreements I can barely discuss what I had for lunch." I attempted to locate Digital Dynamics online. No website, no LinkedIn company page, no business registration I could find. When I brought this up to Jake, he became defensive. "Not every company has a massive online presence," he stated. "Some businesses prefer to maintain a low profile. You're being paranoid." But paranoia felt justified when I began noticing other inconsistencies. Meredith claimed to reside in a downtown apartment, yet I never saw her car parked there when I drove by. She stated she was originally from Oregon, but her accent would occasionally shift, revealing hints of something more southern. She possessed detailed information about our family that Jake swore he had never shared with her. "How did you know our grandmother's middle name?" I asked her once after she had casually mentioned it. "Jake told me," she said without hesitation. But when I questioned Jake later, he appeared bewildered. "I've never told anyone grandma's middle name. Heck, I barely recall it myself." The pivotal moment occurred during Easter dinner when I overheard her on the phone in our guest bathroom. I had gone upstairs to retrieve aspirin from the medicine cabinet when I heard her whispering urgently behind the closed door. "The wedding must happen before his grandmother passes away," she hissed into the phone. "That inheritance won't transfer if we're not married. The lawyers were very clear about the marriage clause in the will. Just keep pretending to be ill until then, and we'll divide everything 60-40 as we discussed." My blood ran cold. Jake's grandmother had been battling pancreatic cancer for months, weakening with each chemotherapy session. The family business, a prosperous chain of hardware stores built over 3 generations, and the family property were destined to pass to Jake upon her death, but only if he was married. An antiquated clause from the 1940s that everyone had forgotten about except the estate lawyers who had mentioned it during a recent will review. Except Meredith, somehow, knew about it. I pressed my ear to the door, my heart pounding as she continued. I don't care what you have to do. Delay the diagnosis, misplace the paperwork, administer the wrong medications. Whatever keeps her alive until I get that ring on my finger. We need 6 more weeks minimum. Once we're married, and the old woman expires, I'll divorce him, and we'll be set for life. The business alone is worth $2 million, plus the property portfolio. The voice on the other end was muffled, but I heard enough to realize this was planned, orchestrated. My brother was being systematically ruined by someone he completely trusted, and our grandmother was apparently being kept unwell to suit Meredith's timeline. Ensure the next round of chemo is especially harsh, she continued. I need her weak enough that nobody questions it when she finally dies, but not so weak that she dies before the wedding. We've come too far to mess this up now. I pulled out my phone and began recording, my hands trembling as I captured every word. The backup plan is still the life insurance policies, right? She inquired. If something goes wrong with the inheritance, Jake's worth $2 million in coverage. But the marriage route is cleaner. No investigations, no suspicious deaths to explain. I nearly dropped my phone. She was planning to kill my brother. After she hung up, I slipped into the guest bedroom and waited for her to exit the bathroom. When she finally emerged, she had reverted to her sweet, concerned girlfriend persona, asking my mother if there was anything she could do to assist with dinner preparation. That night, I commenced my investigation in earnest. When Jake's college friends visited for his birthday party, Meredith would vanish with sudden, debilitating migraines that necessitated dark rooms and complete silence. But I caught her researching his social media from the guest room, memorizing details about people she had supposedly never encountered. She had spiral notebooks filled with information, inside jokes, shared memories, embarrassing college stories, career details, family connections, everything she would need to appear like the ideal girlfriend who just happened to miss meeting his closest friends due to her chronic health issues. My headaches become so severe around large groups, she'd explain later, touching Jake's arm with practiced sympathy. All that noise and energy just overwhelms my system. I'm so sorry I couldn't meet everyone properly. Jake would feel guilty for having friends over, for planning social events, for living his life in a way that caused his girlfriend pain. I found credit reports in her purse when she asked me to retrieve her lip balm from her bag. Not just Jake's, but his entire family's, including mine and our parents. She had been conducting comprehensive background checks on all of us, mapping our financial situations like a military strategist planning an invasion. The reports were exhaustive, showing bank account numbers, credit scores, investment portfolios, property values, even our employment histories and salary ranges. The papers were dated 3 months before she and Jake had supposedly met by chance at a coffee shop near his office. She had been specifically targeting him. The most shocking discovery came when I borrowed her laptop to print wedding invitations, claiming my printer was broken. Her browser history was a masterclass in manipulation and criminal planning, how to rush a wedding timeline, inheritance laws by state, making men propose faster, signs your boyfriend's family is wealthy, how to access spouses' accounts after marriage, digitalis poisoning symptoms, making heart attacks look natural, life insurance payout timelines. But the most chilling search was recent. How to trigger heart attacks in elderly cancer patients without detection. I screenshotted everything, my hands shaking as I documented months of calculated deception and what appeared to be murder planning. For weeks, I accumulated evidence as if building a federal case. Photos of documents, recorded conversations, bank statements showing her escalating debts. She owed $47,000 across 7 credit cards and had 2 active judgments against her for unpaid loans totaling another $23,000. Her car was 3 months behind on payments and scheduled for repossession. She had been evicted from 2 apartments in the past year for non-payment of rent. Jake was her winning lottery ticket, and she was running out of time. I discovered she had been married twice before, both to affluent older men who died under suspicious circumstances. The first husband, Harold Brennan, had suffered a massive heart attack at 52 despite no prior cardiac issues. The second, Robert Martinez, had fallen down the stairs at his home at age 58, breaking his neck. Both deaths were ruled accidental after brief investigations, and both wives inherited everything: substantial life insurance policies, business assets, real estate portfolios. Meredith was not merely a gold digger. She was a serial killer with a specific preference. I attempted to approach this cautiously, sharing minor concerns with my family first. But Meredith had already positioned herself as the victim of my jealousy and mental health struggles. When I mentioned her peculiar work schedule, she had confided in my mother about her severe anxiety disorder that made regular employment difficult. When I questioned her financial contributions to their relationship, she had tearfully explained to my father how her abusive ex-husband had deliberately ruined her credit and left her financially devastated. "I'm so ashamed about my situation," she had sobbed to my parents. "Jake knows everything and accepts me anyway. But Sarah seems to think I'm some kind of gold digger just because I'm not wealthy like your family." Every concern I raised, she had already crafted a sympathetic explanation for. She was always one step ahead, portraying me as the unstable, envious sister who couldn't handle her brother moving on. Jake was completely oblivious to it all. Love does that to people, especially people who have been hurt before. He was so grateful to find someone who seemed to accept him completely, who praised his kindness and success, who made him feel like a hero again after Sarah's betrayal, that he ignored every warning sign I tried to point out. "She makes me feel like myself again," he'd say when I expressed worries. "For the first time since Sarah, I'm not concerned about being betrayed. Meredith's been through her own hell. She understands what it's like to have someone you trust hurt you." The irony was heartbreaking. She was exploiting his trauma against him, using his fear of being hurt again to make him disregard signs that he was being harmed in precisely the same manner. 2 weeks before the wedding, I made copies of everything and went to the police. Detective Morrison listened patiently as I presented the evidence. The recordings, the financial documents, the browser history, the pattern of deceased husbands. But his expression grew increasingly skeptical as I spoke. "Ma'am, being in debt isn't a crime," he finally stated. "Even researching inheritance laws isn't illegal if she's planning to marry into the family." As for the previous husbands, both cases were thoroughly investigated at the time. Without concrete evidence of a current crime, this sounds like a family dispute. "She's planning to kill my brother," I insisted. "And possibly my grandmother." The phone conversation I recorded could be interpreted in multiple ways, he interrupted. Defense attorneys are very good at creating reasonable doubt. He playing sick could mean a lot of things that aren't criminal. He was right, legally, but I knew what I knew. What if she actually harmed someone? I inquired. "Then we'll investigate," he said. "But we can't arrest people for crimes they might commit based on internet searches and suspicious timing." The night before the wedding, I attempted one last desperate effort to reach my brother. "Jake, we need to talk about Meredith. Please, just listen to me for 5 minutes before you say anything." He cut me off before I could even begin, his face flushed with anger and exhaustion from wedding stress. "I'm not listening to this jealousy anymore," he declared. "You've been trying to sabotage us since day one. Every time I'm happy, you find something wrong with it. Sarah poisoned you against the idea of me being in a relationship. This isn't about Sarah or my feelings about your relationships. It's exactly about Sarah," he exploded, his voice echoing through his apartment. "You think every woman is going to hurt me like she did. Well, guess what? Meredith isn't Sarah. She loves me for who I am, not what I have. She's been through hell herself and came out stronger." His words stung because part of them were true. I had been protective of him since his divorce, perhaps overly so, but this was different. "Jake, she knows about Grandma's inheritance clause. She's been planning this marriage as a business transaction." "Enough." He stood up, towering over me. "If you can't support my happiness, if you can't see that I found someone who genuinely cares about me, then maybe you shouldn't be at my wedding tomorrow." The threat felt like a physical blow. Jake and I had been inseparable growing up. He had walked me to school when kids bullied me about my thick glasses and secondhand clothes. I had helped him through his divorce, holding him while he cried over Sarah's betrayal and promising him he'd find real love someday. The thought of losing him to someone who was planning to destroy him was unbearable, but I knew what I had to do. The next morning, I put on my bridesmaid dress, a soft lavender that Meredith had chosen because it would photograph beautifully and complement her wedding photos. I did my makeup carefully, styled my hair into the elegant updo she had requested, and smiled through the pre-wedding photos at her parents' house. I embraced Meredith and told her she looked absolutely stunning in her $8,000 designer dress that Jake had insisted on paying for despite her protests. "You're going to make my brother so happy," I said, the lie tasting bitter in my mouth. I posed with the bridal party and engaged in small talk about flowers and honeymoon plans, nodding enthusiastically when she described their planned 2-week trip to Italy, another expensive vacation that Jake was funding, all while carrying a folder of evidence carefully concealed in a specially sewn pocket inside my dress. The ceremony was held at the Riverside Country Club, Jake's dream wedding venue that he'd talked about since we were children. 300 guests filled the elegant ballroom. Business associates, college friends, extended family, and community members who had known our family for decades. Meredith had insisted on the most expensive package: open bar, 7-course dinner, live band, elaborate floral arrangements that cost more than most people's cars. Every detail was designed to impress people she would never see again after she collected her payout. As I walked down the aisle in front of the bride, carrying a bouquet of white roses and lavender that matched my dress, I caught sight of my grandmother in the front row. She looked heartbreakingly frail in her wheelchair, the cancer treatments having sapped most of her energy and nearly 40 pounds from her once robust frame. But her eyes were bright with joy as she watched her grandson's wedding, her face glowing with happiness at seeing him find love again. She had no idea she was witnessing her own murder plot unfold in real time. The officiant, Pastor Williams, who had known our family for 20 years, began the ceremony with a reading from Corinthians about love being patient and kind. Jake stood at the altar, looking happier than I had seen him in years, his face radiating genuine joy as Meredith approached in her flowing white gown. She looked like something from a fairy tale, which I suppose was exactly the intention. Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to celebrate the union of Jacob Michael Sterling and Meredith and Collins in holy matrimony. Pastor Williams began, his warm voice carrying easily through the flower-filled ballroom. My heart pounded as he continued through the traditional ceremony. This was truly happening. In minutes, my brother would be legally bound to someone who was planning to kill him for money, someone who might have already murdered 2 other men. Marriage is not to be entered into lightly, but reverently, deliberately, and in accordance with the purposes for which it was instituted by God. It signifies the mystical union between Christ and his church, and it is therefore not to be undertaken carelessly or selfishly, but thoughtfully and in the love of God. I considered all the evidence hidden in my dress, the credit reports showing her massive debts, the browser history documenting searches for murder methods, the recorded phone conversation about keeping our grandmother sick, the pattern of deceased husbands who had all died unexpectedly after marrying her. Would anyone believe me? Would it matter if they did? Marriage is the blessed arrangement and institution ordained by God in paradise, and it has been confirmed as honorable among all men. It is therefore not to be undertaken lightly or thoughtlessly, but with reverence and in the fear of God. The irony of those words about not undertaking marriage lightly, while watching someone who had transformed marriage into a murder weapon, was not lost on me. If any person can show just cause why they may not be joined together, let them speak now or forever hold their peace. The moment arrived faster than I anticipated, the traditional words that usually pass without incident in modern weddings, a mere formality that Pastor Williams probably hadn't seen interrupted in his decades of performing ceremonies. I stood up slowly, my legs trembling with adrenaline and terror. I do. The church fell silent, so completely I could hear the air conditioning humming. 300 people turned to stare at me. I felt their shock, their confusion, their judgment washing over me in waves. Jake's face turned white, then red with embarrassment and fury. Meredith's expression flickered rapidly through surprise, rage, and then quickly settled into hurt confusion, her default manipulation tactic. I object to this marriage, I declared, my voice carrying clearly through the silent room despite my trembling hands. Jake stepped forward from the altar, his face a mask of humiliation and anger. Sarah, sit down now. This is completely inappropriate. I can't do that, I said, reaching for the folder hidden in my dress. Everyone needs to see this. Everyone needs to know what's really happening here. Meredith's eyes locked onto the folder like a predator spotting prey, and for just a second, her carefully constructed mask slipped completely. I saw pure, murderous hatred flash across her face before she composed herself and shifted into victim mode. I'm so sorry, everyone, she said to the crowd, her voice shaking with practiced emotion and tears beginning to form in her eyes. Jake's sister has been struggling with some serious personal issues lately. She's been against our relationship from the very beginning, and we've tried to be understanding and supportive. Murmurs of sympathy rippled through the guests. Several people nodded knowingly, their faces showing pity for what they assumed was a family dealing with mental health struggles. It was easier to believe that explanation than the truth. Sarah has been in therapy, Jake added, trying to salvage the situation and minimize the embarrassment. She's having trouble accepting that I've moved on from my divorce and found happiness again. I walked toward the altar, opening the folder and pulling out the first document. Meredith, tell everyone about your phone call on Easter Sunday. The one where you discussed keeping our grandmother sick until after the wedding so you could inherit the family business. The color drained from Meredith's face so quickly I thought she might faint, but she recovered with impressive speed. I have absolutely no idea what you're talking about, she said, tears starting to flow freely now. This is my wedding day. How could you do this to me, to your own brother? Because I have it recorded, I said, pulling out my phone. Would you like me to play it for everyone? I pressed play, and her voice filled the silent church, crystal clear and unmistakably hers. The wedding has to be before his grandmother dies. That inheritance won't transfer if we're not married. The lawyers were very clear about the marriage clause. Just keep playing sick until then, and we'll split everything 60-40 like we discussed. The room erupted in gasps, whispers, and shocked exclamations. I watched faces change from confusion to horror as the implications sank in. My grandmother clutched her chest, her face pale with understanding and betrayal. Jake stared at Meredith like he had never seen her before, which in many ways, he hadn't. That's not. I wasn't. Meredith started. But I was already pulling out more evidence, spreading papers across the altar like I was presenting a case for a jury. Here are her credit reports showing $47,000 in active debt across multiple accounts, I announced, holding up the documents. Here's her browser history documenting months of research into our family's finances, inheritance laws, and murder methods. Here are records of her 2 previous marriages to wealthy men who both died under suspicious circumstances shortly after their weddings. I spread the papers across the altar, creating an undeniable display of evidence that couldn't be explained away or dismissed as jealousy. She didn't meet you by accident, Jake. I continued, my voice growing stronger as I saw doubt creeping into his expression. She's been tracking our family for months, waiting for the right opportunity to strike. You're not her first target, and if this marriage happened, you wouldn't be her last victim. Jake picked up one of the credit reports with trembling hands, scanning the numbers that narrated the story of Meredith's desperate financial situation. Meredith, is this real? These debts. These dates. She was trapped, her carefully constructed lies crumbling in real time as hundreds of people watched. But Meredith was a survivor who had perfected her craft over years of deception, and survivors adapt quickly when cornered. Okay, yes, she said, abandoning the innocent act entirely and speaking in a voice I had never heard from her before, cold, calculating, completely different from the sweet girlfriend persona. I researched your family before we started dating, but that's just being smart in today's world. Everyone does background checks on people they're going to commit to. It doesn't mean I don't love him. You told us you'd never been married before, Jake said quietly, his voice hollow with betrayal. I said my previous relationships didn't work out, she replied with a shrug. That's technically true. Death is the ultimate relationship failure. 2 husbands died, Meredith. Both mysteriously, both wealthy, both shortly after marrying you. She actually laughed, a sound completely unlike any laugh she had ever made around our family. It was harsh, bitter, and utterly devoid of warmth. Mysteriously, she mocked. Harold had a heart attack because he was 300 pounds and lived on nothing but bacon and whiskey. Robert fell downstairs because he was drunk 20 hours a day and could barely walk straight. If that's mysterious, then every widow in America should be under investigation. The cold calculation in her voice, the casual way she dismissed the deaths of men she had supposedly loved, was terrifying. This was who she truly was underneath the sweet, vulnerable act. A predator who viewed human lives as business opportunities. My father stepped forward from the front row, his face red with anger. Young lady, I think you need to leave immediately. I'm not going anywhere. Meredith snapped, her mask completely gone now. This is my wedding, and these are lies being spread by a jealous, mentally unstable woman who can't handle her brother moving on with his life. Then explain the phone conversation. I challenged, holding up my phone again. Explain planning to keep our grandmother sick until after the wedding. Explain discussing splitting Jake's inheritance with someone. For the first time since I had known her, Meredith had no immediate answer. She looked around the room, possibly assessing her options or searching for escape routes, then seemed to make a decision. Fine, she said with venom, pulling off her engagement ring and throwing it at Jake's feet, where it clinked against the marble floor. You want to believe your psychotic sister over me? Go ahead, but you're making the biggest mistake of your life. She started walking toward the back of the church, her wedding dress trailing behind her like a white flag of surrender. But she stopped at the door and turned back, her face twisted with rage. Jake, when you realize what you've lost, don't come looking for me, she snarled. And when your precious sister destroys every relationship you ever try to have, because she can't stand to see you happy with anyone, remember this moment. Remember that you chose her mental illness over my love. She walked out, and nearly half the guests followed her, some supporting her, others just eager to witness more drama in the parking lot, or simply wanting to escape the uncomfortable situation. Jake stood among the scattered papers, still holding her credit report, surrounded by the ruins of what was supposed to be the happiest day of his life. His dream wedding had become a public nightmare in front of everyone he knew and respected. "Jake," I said softly, approaching him carefully, as if he might bolt. "I'm so sorry it happened this way, but don't." He held up his hand, his voice hollow. "Just don't say anything right now. I can't. I need a minute to process this." Pastor Williams, clearly shaken by the most dramatic ceremony of his career, cleared his throat. "Perhaps we should move this conversation to somewhere more private." My parents, Jake, and I ended up in the country club's manager's office while the remaining guests were directed to the reception hall for drinks and whatever explanation the staff could provide. Jake sat in a leather chair, still in his tuxedo, staring at the evidence spread across the mahogany desk like pieces of a puzzle he couldn't quite solve. "How long have you known?" he asked finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "I started suspecting things at Easter when I overheard that phone call, but I've been actively gathering evidence for about 6 weeks. 6 weeks? He nodded slowly, as if trying to comprehend a timeline that didn't align with his reality. "And you didn't think to tell me any of this?" "I tried," I said, frustration bleeding into my voice. "Every time I brought up concerns, you said I was jealous or mentally unstable. You threatened to uninvite me from the wedding when I tried to talk to you last night." My father picked up the recording device, turning it over in his hands. "Son, this is pretty damning evidence. The phone conversation alone suggests she was planning something terrible." "I know what it suggests." Jake's voice was flat, emotionless. I need to understand how I got this so completely wrong again. How do I keep choosing women who want to destroy me?" My mother sat beside him, placing her hand on his shoulder. "Honey, this isn't your fault. She's clearly a professional at this kind of manipulation." "A professional what? Con artist? Serial killer? How do I keep falling for people who see me as a target instead of a person?" The pain in his voice broke my heart. This was exactly what I'd been afraid of, that even saving him would somehow damage him further. That exposing Meredith's deception would make him question his own judgment about everyone. "You didn't choose this," I said firmly. "She chose you. She researched you, studied you, tracked you down, and manipulated you with surgical precision. Nothing about your relationship was real or random or based on your choices." Detective Morrison arrived an hour later. I had called him before the ceremony, asking him to be on standby in case my objection actually worked and we needed law enforcement. He interviewed all of us, reviewed the evidence with the serious attention it deserved, and made several phone calls to colleagues in other states. "The deaths of her previous husbands are being reopened as active investigations," he told us after finishing his calls. "And we're looking at multiple fraud charges related to the false identity documents she used to research your family's finances and the identity theft involved in obtaining your credit reports." "False identity?" Jake looked up with confusion. "Meredith and Collins isn't her real name," Detective Morrison explained. "She's actually Michelle Carter, and she has an extensive record of small-time cons going back 15 years. Marriage fraud, credit card scams, insurance claims, identity theft. She's been building up to bigger targets as her skills improved." Jake was quiet for a long time after Detective Morrison left to coordinate with other agencies. Finally, he looked directly at me. "I owe you the biggest apology of my life," he said. "Not just for today, but for weeks of dismissing your concerns and calling you crazy." "You don't owe me anything," I replied. "You're my brother. Protecting you is my job, even when I'm being a complete idiot who won't listen to reason. Especially then." We spent the rest of the evening in the hotel bar, still in our wedding attire, getting progressively more inebriated while Jake processed the reality of his near miss. Some of the wedding guests joined us, curious about the dramatic turn of events and wanting to ensure Jake was okay. By midnight, it had transformed into an oddly festive gathering, a celebration of a bullet dodged rather than a marriage celebrated. "You know what the worst part is?" Jake said around 1 in the morning, loosening his bow tie and looking more relaxed than he had in months. "I actually thought I was getting better at judging people. After Sarah, I promised myself I'd be more careful, more observant, more aware of red flags. And instead, I picked someone even worse. Sarah was a cheater and a thief," I pointed out. "But she wasn't planning to murder you for your life insurance. There's a significant difference in the level of evil we're talking about here." "Yeah, one's more creative than the other," he said with dark humor. Our cousin David, who had stayed for the impromptu reception, raised his glass. "Here's to Sarah for saving Jake's life, and probably his inheritance. Here's to families who don't give up on each other, even when it's hard," Jake corrected, clinking his glass against mine. 3 weeks later, Detective Morrison called with major updates. Meredith, or Michelle, had been apprehended in Las Vegas while attempting to marry a casino owner using yet another false identity. The investigations into her previous husbands had uncovered evidence of digitalis poisoning in both cases, a plant-based toxin that mimics heart attack symptoms and is nearly undetectable without specific testing. She was facing multiple charges of murder in the first degree, fraud, conspiracy, and identity theft across 4 states. Jake had his locks changed and hired a private security company after receiving several threatening phone calls from an unknown number that we all assumed was Meredith calling from jail. He also began therapy with a specialist in trauma and manipulation to work through what he called his broken picker when it came to relationships. "I need to understand why I'm attracted to people who want to hurt me," he told me after his first session. "There has to be something I'm missing, some pattern I'm not seeing." 6 months later, our grandmother passed away peacefully in her sleep, surrounded by family who loved her. Jake inherited the family business as intended, but more importantly, he was alive to receive it and honor her memory. At her funeral, he squeezed my hand during the service. "She would have been heartbroken to know what almost happened," he whispered. "She would have been proud that family protected family," I whispered back. A year later, Jake started dating Emma, a 3rd-grade teacher from the elementary school near his house. She was kind, genuine, financially independent, and had her own career and life goals. More importantly, when Jake told her about what had happened with Meredith, she was horrified rather than impressed, which seemed like an excellent sign for his recovery. "I'm going to need you to investigate her too," Jake joked when he first brought Emma to Sunday dinner. "Already did a preliminary background check," I replied with a grin. "Clean credit history, stable employment for 6 years, no mysterious dead husbands, and she insisted on paying for her own coffee on your first date. You're good to go. You actually ran a background check?" Emma asked, laughing. "After what happened, I'm running background checks on everyone who comes within 10 feet of my family," I said. "It's nothing personal." "It's completely personal," Emma replied. "And I respect that. Family should protect family. As for me, I learned that sometimes protecting the people you love means risking their anger, resentment, and even their relationship with you. I learned that family loyalty isn't just about supporting each other's choices. Sometimes it's about refusing to support them when those choices are dangerous, even if that refusal causes pain in the short term. And I learned that standing up in front of 300 people and disrupting a wedding is simultaneously the most terrifying and most necessary thing I've ever done in my life. Jake and Emma got engaged this past Christmas. They're planning a small ceremony next spring, just immediate family and close friends, at our parents' house. Jake asked me to be his best man instead of a traditional bridesmaid. "I need someone who will speak up if anything seems wrong," he said when he asked. "Always," I promised. "That's what family is for." Meredith, or Michelle, was convicted on 2 counts of murder in the 1st degree and multiple fraud charges across 4 states. She's serving life without the possibility of parole in a maximum security facility. Her appeals have all been denied. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd remained silent that day. If I'd let the wedding proceed and hoped for the best. If I'd chosen to avoid conflict rather than create a scene. But then I look at my brother, alive, happy, and building a healthy relationship with someone who genuinely loves him for who he is. And I know I made the right choice. Family protects family, even when it's messy and uncomfortable and humiliating. Even when it means standing up at an altar and disrupting everything in front of hundreds of people. Even when it costs you temporary relationships and social standing. Because sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to let someone you care about destroy themselves, even if they resent you for it in the moment.